if you have a good enough relationship to manage those players and they trust you enough to follow the direction that you are giving them with pure intention and good practice, there is no reason why those players won't change their behavior.
You're listening to 15M Mastery, a show that empowers you with insights from the leading iGaming experts to enhance your personal or business performance. The show is brought to you by tech-driven affiliate and media company Already Media, and supported by the AI-powered data analytics platform Blask. Yo Investments, a fund manager investing in outstanding people who are disrupting the iGaming, fintech, and crypto industries. And BC Game, the multi-award winning crypto casino with a player-centric approach. Hello and welcome back to 15M Mastery. In our final episode with Gali Hartuv from WarriorLab, we're tackling a critical topic, avoiding false positives in performance data. In today's episode, we'll discuss how to recognize and avoid false positives to make smarter strategic decisions. Welcome back for the final episode, Gali.
I'm really happy to be here, Dimitri. Thank you so much again for having me here.
All right. What are the false positives in the context of performance data and why are they problematic?
So when I look at false positives, I will break it down from a VIP standpoint into two categories. One is segmentation and the other one is financial performance. So when I look at false positives, on the segmentation side, usually comes down to incorrectly segmented player groups. It's very easy to inflate numbers by simply having an over-inflated VIP segment. And I had a case like this a couple years ago where I came in to support an operator that told me they had 90,000 VIPs. And immediately I'm sitting there thinking, well, then you're making billions and billions with your 90,000. And after reviewing this data and actually reviewing the performance, this operator had 3,500 VIPs. And we cut the program completely, which had a drastic impact on not just activity levels going from mid-30s to low 90s as activity levels. We saw bonus spending reduce 70% because of trying to award VIP bonuses to non-VIP players. You are rewarding subpar performance with elevated rewards. And beyond that, in terms of segmentation, misallocation, what happens is you also start to have operational impacts. This particular company was equipped with a team that was ready to handle 90,000 potential players, when in reality, they needed 25% of that team. And 75% was a redundant resource that was not being fully utilized. And that's an operational expense. So on the segmentation side, having correctly classified what a VIP is, how to group those VIPs into your relevant segments, and who manages those segments, that's one element of false positive, because you're going to add in effectively 86,500 players and call them VIPs. Of course, your numbers are going to look a very different way than to 3,500 true VIPs. In addition to that, outside of segmentation is the financial aspects, where false positives are presented in multiple ways. The first one where we see the most common false positive is growth metrics. So we're seeing the financial transactional KPIs going up, either as a result of incorrect allocation or as a result of overutilization of a particular segment. And the alternative side over there is that we're not looking into unsustainable practices and volatility. When we're looking at false positives, we are celebrating purely the metric with the exclusion of the behavior behind that metric. And what we have to start looking into when we start analyzing and breaking down false positives is, what is the behavioral element behind the outcome? And that behavior component is very difficult to break down as well as to track, because you first need to classify what the behavior is. And then you need to apply quantifiable metrics to something that is behavior driven. And that's something that takes a collaborative approach between the customer facing units and the people that manage the data and articulate that behavior into a quantifiable report.
But how can teams identify that, when and whether they're relying on misleading data?
I think when it comes to how to identify it, you first need to accept that there is a potential problem that has been overlooked. You need to challenge what has historically been perceived as positive. And the reality is that takes going back and retroactively challenging your company or challenging a particular business unit and going, well, let's actually break down the last 3 months. What are we trying to identify? We had this number of active players that contributed this amount of unit towards our overall performance. This was the KPI and the objective of the team. Now let's break down how we got to the result. And you start to reverse engineer the result. How many unique depositors? What was the average revenue per user or per active user? What was the bonus spend that we generated in order to achieve what we achieved? What was the bonus amount proportionately to the deposit amount that we got as a percentage or ratio? Was that ratio healthy compared to previous months? And then we start to break down and we start cross-checking these data sets against each other to look and compare over time. And if you want to apply a marketing element, we're looking at almost a recency, frequency, monetary approach, but breaking it down more to something specific. So in this case, we're talking about growth. If the growth is not sustainable, you're going to see these sudden shifts in your ratios. You're going to start seeing the number of unique users change, and you're also going to see the dependency change. So the identifying aspect, how do you get there? You need to be able to critically break down what I've just described. And if you don't know how to do that, then you're going to need to ask for help. Those that are already doing this are already ahead of those who aren't. And those that have started accepting that not every positive is a true positive, those are the ones that are looking at data and performance more critically and trying to remedy bad behavior and remedy bad practices early enough that you don't start to build abuse or build unsustainable environments long term. Because to unteach that behavior, that's a very challenging and time intensive process.
Is there a way how organizations, take any steps to ensure the data accuracy and its reliability, apart from the technical side of things, obviously?
I've always been an advocate for challenging the subject matter expert. I think a lot of conventional or traditional organizational structures have key individuals in positions that take full ownership of particular functions because they are the subject matter expert in the room. But often what happens is if there's no one there to bounce ideas or actions off, if there's only one subject matter expert or one head of, it becomes very challenging for not just that individual, but for the business to look beyond the individual suggestion, because let's be honest, not all of us are going to have all the answers. We certainly aren't all perfect. And we do need that springboard and that challenge environment that if there is a suggestion or there is something put forward, we need to be critical in a way, but constructively, not destructive, to be able to challenge certain scenarios with the intention of thinking differently. And this is something that as consultants in WarriorLab, for example, this is one of our functions, to be that critical voice at the table and to challenge businesses or ideas with alternative ideas to see if we've considered all factors. It's to be the voice at the table that doesn't say yes because we have to as employees or because we are afraid of the ramification of what happens if you say no, or being perceived as disruptive or as a non-team player. The reality is that as businesses, we should be enabling and encouraging an environment that people look to other people's work in a constructive way and welcoming new voices and new thought processes on areas that may not necessarily be our primary focus or forte, but allowing for an outside perspective to change the way that we're approaching things. And if I reference you in this example as a perfect case, how you look to people outside of the iGaming industry for inspiration, and you've hired people in your various companies that come from outside of iGaming that have changed the way that you innovate and you approach iGaming methodology. This is an exact example that we can apply from within.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out.
It was a good example and relevant.
Yeah,
So, good
yeah,
job.
yeah. Thanks a lot. Let's say we got all the data. Let's say we've realized that this data is not misleading. We verified it, and it led us to a certain insights. The question is, how can we validate these insights before acting on them? And can you mention maybe some of the best practices, what we can do in these cases?
So I like to look at it more from a test group perspective. If you look at it from almost like marketing again, if you were to A/B test a promotion, you need to be able to test the results in your control group and then how, as you would function generally. So for me, it's always a case of if we were to change the behavior of the control group, what is the change that we see when we're looking at general versus control? And for me, it's always a case of you want to first try and test your theory in isolation before you roll out to the masses. Often what you'll find, especially with these insights, is in some cases, it completely changes the way that we need to do things. And I had a case very recently where a company that had followed a legacy approach for several years, we ran a similar approach to determine whether the data was accurate. There was one report in particular that every business unit was utilizing as forecast and prediction. And we found that that report had one flaw, and that is that it didn't factor in volatility correctly. And so because it didn't factor in volatility and seasonality, we were basing forecasts on those outliers, and it resulted in our forecasts pushing different business units to act overly aggressively because we were aiming for targets that could not be sustained outside of season. And that is something, as just one example, that led to a breakdown in this report and a complete rebuild where we had to factor in outliers, we had to factor in seasonality, we had to factor in the cases of these volatile spikes short term in order to sustain the performance long term. And I think once you have applied that logic to that control group in a test environment or in isolation, and VIP, by the way, is a perfect environment for that because we have the relationship to support the change. The account managers are the driving force behind trying to change that behavior. So VIP is a perfect environment to experiment. And often operators have the adverse mentality. And why would I experiment with my VIP players? If you have a good enough relationship to manage those players and they trust you enough to follow the direction that you are giving them with pure intention and good practice, there is no reason why those players won't change their behavior.
Just to be able to build this culture of data integrity and critical analysis, what kind of advice do you have the leaders of any iGaming organization?
I think when it comes to data integrity, it's hugely important that the final production of that data is not centralized to a single person, that there are multiple people involved as part of that data creation, that there is an oversight and a sign-off process, and that before you start rolling out reports and rolling out insights, that there is a proper explanation on utilization and purpose before it becomes set in stone as a function or a KPI. The teams that utilize those insights and the teams that are leveraging those reports created potentially outside of their function need to understand the intention and the purpose behind what you're giving them to utilize. That would be my advice.
Wow, I absolutely love this insight, and it's really good to finish the episode with the thought like that, because I don't think that many organizations and leaders of these organizations are thinking that way. And I think this is one of the episodes which can be watched backwards because you can start with this beautiful piece of advice and then go straight into how do you use this data and leverage this data to build a high performing organization. I absolutely love what we recorded today, Gali. Thank you so much for your time. I absolutely love your insights.
It's always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much again for having me.